What you say? What'd you say? What up, YouTube? It's your boy, CM the Goat. Man, back with a new video, you know what I'm saying? We're going to cap on the Diddy trial. So it's heading toward the end, man. You know, as y'all know, they're getting to closing arguments. So we're going to get into it, man. You know what I'm saying? Some of the charges has been dropped, you know. I think it was a trafficking charge. And I think a couple more on the racketeering charge or whatever. But I think, the kidnapping charge and the trafficking charge as well. Some among others. So, you know, it was like 3 of them. So we're going to get into this video and, see what's going on, you know what I'm saying? So, hey, you never know, man. He might be coming home. You never know. It might be a goddamn mistrial. You know what I'm saying? Or he might get acquitted. You never know. So let's just see what happens. So Malone TV News, man, let's get started, man. If you haven't, like, share, and subscribe to the channel, man. Let's go.
Through Rula, it's easier to connect with a therapist who specializes in you. Tell us what's important and we'll provide a curated list of in-network providers. Explore your matches and pick the provider that feels like the best fit for you. Schedule your appointment. See you.
Tax evasion and money laundering. PPP loan. Jesus Christ.
We're academics, man.
How many? They put 24 predicate acts that they believe that Fat Joe has done. They're saying that Fat Joe has a RICO, like he has a criminal enterprise. Okay. That's interesting.
That's another.
Now they're going over the enterprise. These are the people, Fat Joe, this person. This is Fat Joe's daughter, supposedly. Slate is a conduit, which is a financial conduit. Believe that LLC does money laundering for them. This thing. Enforcers.
1 second. That's on the Fat Joe trial. I'm sorry. Let's see. Here we go.
Now to the defense, resting in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Combs chose not to take the stand, and our Dan Abrams and Shauna Lloyd are standing by to break down the case. But first, let's go back to Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky at the courthouse. Good morning again, Aaron.
And good morning again to you, Michael. After more than 6 weeks of testimony from 34 witnesses, the case against Sean Combs, charging him with racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking, is about to go to the jury. And whatever the 8 men and 4 women, all college-educated jurors decide, they'll do it without hearing directly from Sean Combs. When the judge asked whether Combs was waiving his right to testify in his own defense, he stood and said, "That is totally my decision." Combs also told the judge, "I've been wanting to tell you, thank you. You're doing an excellent job." Defense attorneys called no witnesses, resting their case a short time after prosecutors rested theirs. Jurors saw hundreds of pieces of evidence, including nearly an hour of explicit footage from sex tapes of Cassie Ventura and a woman known by the pseudonym Jane with male escorts. As the evidentiary phase of the trial concluded, Combs seemed relaxed, amiably chatting with his attorneys and reading a book, The Power of Positive Thinking. His attorneys asked the judge for an immediate verdict of acquittal, saying the government failed to meet its burden. The judge did not immediately rule. The jury has the day off here while attorneys meet with the judge. Closing arguments are going to begin on Thursday with deliberations as soon as late Friday, maybe more likely early Monday. Michael?
And we know you got that covered for us there, Aaron. Thank you. Now let's bring in ABC News Chief Legal Analyst Dan Abrams and ABC News Live contributor Shauna Lloyd. Dan, I'm going to start with you. Do you think the prosecution proved its case?
Remember, there are different charges here, right? There's racketeering charges, there's sex trafficking charges, and there's a charge of transportation for the purposes of engaging in prostitution. Why am I pointing that out? Because the last charge is definitely the strongest one, meaning the one that is probably the easiest for the prosecution to prove. Why? Because all they need is the jury to believe one of the prostitutes who testified saying, I was paid to engage in prostitution and was brought across state lines to do it. In that case, I think that they've got a pretty strong case. When it comes to the other two sets, it's close. It's going to be very close. Again, I think the RICO, the racketeering, going to be the hardest, sex trafficking next, and this one the most likely of a conviction.
And Shauna, what would a split verdict look like?
So a split verdict is going to really depend on what the jury finds. Remember, as Dan said, we have 5 charges, which means they have to make the decision of guilty or not guilty about each charge. So they may find him not guilty of some charges, guilty of others. And let's not just throw it in there. We could have a hung jury on one of the charges. So this can be a very diverse verdict that we're not typically used to seeing. It's just that there's so many charges, and that's why that happens.
And we know Combs did not testify, but the defense not putting on any witnesses at all. What did you make of that?
You know, that tells me that the defense believes that there is enough reasonable doubt that they do not need to put on additional witnesses. Because remember, any additional witnesses also opens them up to additional cross-examination. And there may be information that you do not want them to get into, or it just may not be beneficial for your case. Less is more sometimes, especially with these type of sprawling charges.
And Dan, with all the public attention, the headlines, are you surprised at all that the jury wasn't sequestered in this trial?
Not really. I mean, look, it's really rare to sequester a jury, and it's become rarer. Why? Because it's really, really hard now to prevent jurors from getting information, right? What are you going to do? For 2 months, you're going to take away their phones, and you're going to make them sleep at a hotel, and you're going to make sure you monitor all their emails, et cetera. It just doesn't happen very much anymore. So could the judge have sequestered them just for deliberations? Yeah. But again, you could make the argument that everything's kind of been out there. They've been talking to their friends. They've been influenced in the way that they're going to be. So I don't know that it would have made a big difference with regard to sequestration. I'm not that surprised that it didn't happen.
And now it's time for the closing arguments. But what does each side need to do? Sean, I'm going to start with you. Take the prosecution for us. What do they need to do in the closing argument?
So the prosecution really needs to shore up their cases and connect the dots for the jury. When we're talking about this RICO charge, they have to be very clear about who they believe was a part of this conspiracy and the acts that they took to further the conspiracy, along with the underlying predicate crimes. They've done a great job with the transportation for prostitution because that's very clear. We see the bank records, we've seen them testify, we've seen the money move, and we know why they were there. So that charge is there. For the trafficking, that's going to be very hard, but what they have to do is hone in on the idea that these are not acts they would have done but for the force. In the case of Cassie, we know that she was being physically abused. And in the case of Jane, the idea that he was paying her rent and holding that over her head is why she chose to engage in those acts.
Okay, so that's the prosecution.
Yes.
What about the defense, Dan?
Consent and reasonable doubt, right? That the two key witnesses here were in long-term relationships with him, that they could have left, that they continued to engage with him. That's number one. And number two is going to be the legal standard, right? Is going to be saying, Look, they have to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Look at the technical definitions of these charges. That's not domestic violence. We're talking about racketeering here. We're talking about sex trafficking. That's what they're going to focus on, and in the hope that they say they just don't have it.
Yeah, we'll have to see what happens.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I know, it's been a month.
It has.
Yeah.
Oh,
It
all
Yeah.
right.
has.
We appreciate your insight.
Well, from what I see, man, you know what I'm saying? It could be a hung jury. You never know. You know what I mean? We'll just have to wait and see tomorrow, see what happened, you know, on Thursday, see what happened, you know. So, yeah, and I got one more video that I want to show you guys as well on this case, man. You know, I guess Diddy didn't want to go on the stand. He didn't want to say anything. So he got his team, you know what I'm saying? He got some great lawyers. I'm going to say that. Just say that. But let's get into this other video. Hold on one second. Let's see.
Testimony from nearly 3 dozen witnesses, both sides resting today in the sex trafficking and racketeering trial against Sean Diddy Combs. The defense started and ended its case today without calling any witnesses, and Combs confirming to the judge that he won't take the stand in his own defense. The day began with the defense finishing their cross-examination of the government's last witness, a Homeland Security Investigations special agent. During his testimony, the defense denying Combs ran a criminal enterprise, showing how Combs's ex-girlfriend, known as Jane, would set up her own hotel nights. In one text message, an escort writing, quote, "Sorry for the late text. It's no rush. Let me know if you're up to coming to LA Saturday." In another message to a different escort, Jane texting, quote, "This is a 911 freak emergency." Combs has pleaded not guilty to all charges. If convicted, he faces the possibility of life in prison. And coming up, the top moments searched so far in this trial. But we begin with an in-depth look at the more than 6 weeks of testimony in this high-profile trial now that both the defense and prosecution have rested. Here's our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Katursky.
Soon, a jury of 8 men and 4 women will be handed the case after hearing from 34 witnesses and examining more than 1,000 pieces of evidence, including voice notes of Combs played in court.
Where my life is at right now, I don't have no time for no games, baby girl. Me and you can be mad, I can have a spat, we can have whatever. Then after that, you better get on your job.
Some of the government's key testimony came from 3 alleged victims: 7 former Combs employees, 4 hotel workers, 2 celebrities, and 2 male escorts, one known as the Punisher and Daniel Phillip. Prosecutors say this testimony and hundreds of pieces of evidence paint a picture of a criminal enterprise they say Combs used to coerce, traffic, and transport his alleged victims, with the defense unsuccessfully filing for 2 mistrials and the judge dismissing 1 juror for lack of candor. And in the midst of it all, a child was born, the star witness Cassie Ventura.
And Aaron joins us now from outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, the prosecution and the defense both today. What was the mood like in the courtroom?
Oh boy, it sure shifted today, Eva, because for a while it was pretty mind-numbing. The defense cross-examination of the last prosecution witness went through hours of text messages, and the federal agent reading them out in deadpan, even some of the raunchier ones containing sexual instructions or desires and eggplant emojis and heart emojis, and it was pretty tough for the jury to stay awake. But then there was a flurry of things that occurred that brought the case to a conclusion in fairly rapid succession. The prosecution rested. Defense attorneys moved for an automatic verdict of acquittal. Sean Combs said he would not testify, rising from his seat to affirm that to the judge. And then finally, the defense case came and went in mere minutes. After reading several text messages but calling no witnesses, the defense rested.
Let's talk about the jury, their response to that cross-examination of the Homeland Security agent. You said it was pretty mind-numbing.
Well, it just went on even longer than defense attorney Teddy Garagos had intended, and it included messages from across years through different exhibits meant to show that Jane, Sean Combs' former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym, was an active participant in the sexual acts that federal prosecutors say were coerced. And the defense attorneys obviously have a different view that this was consensual and that Jane was a willing participant. She was the one in some cases who was arranging for the male escorts for these nights in hotels. She was the one that Sean Combs tasked to keep things secret from some of his employees, the defense suggesting that Combs actually wanted to shield employees from knowing what he was up to, not using them as part of a criminal enterprise.
And the jury got to see some of those texts back and forth between Combs and his ex-girlfriend Jane, attempting to hide some things from those employees. What did those texts say?
Don't let KK know. I can't have KK finding out. And then Jane would text some of the escorts to wait a few minutes so that the staff could clear out. In some cases, Jane, according to these text messages, ended up setting up the hotel rooms by herself. And there was a moment, too, when the federal agent was asked about bank records that showed that even though one of Combs's business accounts paid for some of the freak-off supplies, that account was reimbursed by one of Combs's personal accounts. And federal prosecutor Maureen Comey stood up on redirect and said, did Sean Combs, according to these records, still transport a male escort across state lines? And, of course, the records indicated that yes, but the defense objected. The judge sustained the objection. But it certainly broke what had otherwise been a rather monotonous affair.
Let's talk about that moment when the judge asked Combs if he wanted to testify on his own behalf. What was that like in the courtroom?
It was the first time, albeit without the jury in the room, that Sean Combs has spoken during his trial. And he stood, he affirmed to the judge that he was not going to testify. The judge began by asking him how he was feeling. And the Combs said he was doing great. And he said, I want to thank you. Said this to the judge, complimenting him. You're doing an excellent job. And Judge Subramanian said, thank you, before continuing with his allocution, just to affirm that Combs was making this decision of his own accord in consultation with lawyers. But as Combs said, it was totally my decision.
Okay, so both sides have rested. What can we expect for court going forward this week?
So court is dark tomorrow, save for the attorneys. The jury won't be there. The attorneys and the judge are going to discuss the language that the judge will use to instruct the jury about the law. This may seem straightforward, but there are nuances that each side will try to get in to try and see things favorable to their view of the case. So they'll hammer that out without the jury present tomorrow. On Thursday, the prosecutors will begin with closing statements, followed by the defense. Each side signaled they have about 4 hours of summations. Prosecutors get an extra rebuttal case, and that should take us into Friday, when the judge will read his instructions to the jury before they begin deliberations, maybe late Friday, more likely early Monday.
Aaron Katersky, thank you so much there from the courthouse. Now, joining us to break down the legal analysis is our ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, okay, so both sides have now rested. Let's just kind of zoom out here a bit. Walk us through what's happened in this trial.
So we're kind of looking at the trial by the numbers, so to speak. 4 days of jury selection. We found the 8 men and 4 women who will ultimately decide the case. We lost one juror along the way, but an alternate has taken their place, keeping those numbers of 8 and 4 nonetheless. 28 days of testimony, and for some of those days, it's been very, very long, especially these last few days with the summary witness. And of course, 34 prosecution witnesses, and we didn't have an extra space for a line, but of course, 0 defense witnesses because they didn't put on a case in the traditional sense of having a witness take the stand, instead just reading evidence into the record. And that's their argument, that this case wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the government.
Okay, so the prosecution actually released some additional evidence this week. What did they present to the jury?
So this is what we saw as individuals inside the courtroom. We saw the kind of setup and takedown of the aftermath of the damage of the hotels to freak-offs. We saw the trips that Combs had went to, either with or without some of the alleged victims in this case. And we saw these during the trial. It's very interesting if I can kind of paint you a picture of when you're sitting there watching the court, the attorneys all have large screens in front of them, and there's a large TV, maybe about the size of this, that the rest of the audience gets to see the evidence as it's presented and it's marshaled through the case. A lot of it was redacted because it has very personal information, but we all got to see these play out in court.
Okay, so the defense has argued throughout this trial that all of the sex at issue in this trial was consensual. With this final witness, the special agent that took the stand, how did they try to address this issue with him?
So consent through this witness was more or less through the text messages that they found through the electronic forensics, being the cell phone of Sean Combs, the cell phones of KK or Christina Coram, D-Rock or Jane, because this witness focused on the evidence as it applied to Jane. And it's looking at the statements in real time that the AUSA really hammered home that we heard from Jane prior when she's on the stand as to how she felt about the relationship, how she felt used by Sean Combs, how she regretted many of the interactions that she had with him, and how she believed that these were non-consensual encounters. And so that's how we heard more through this witness. But through other witnesses, especially Jane, that issue of consent was pivotal because the defense put on the table from the very beginning that this was about domestic violence, not about trafficking, the pivotal issue being consent.
Sean Combs today said that he wasn't testifying. He told the judge that. How does the defense, without him taking the stand, there's no witnesses, how do they create reasonable doubt here?
So for the defense, the reasonable doubt was born out of the cross-examination of these witnesses. What they're looking at in terms of the case is saying the burden does not exist with Sean Combs. He has a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself, and you cannot use that against him. The judge will give that explanation to the jury, and they will begin to consider this case from the standpoint of, did the government prove their case? Here are the elements. Here are the definitions. Here are the language that is being used to articulate what these crimes are. And then it's simply a matter of plugging in those facts. As Aaron pointed out, either side will have an opportunity to give closing arguments, with the government having the last word on a rebuttal. And from there, deliberation. An hour, a day, days. We don't know how long this could last for, but it'll soon be in the hands of the jury.
Yep, we're all waiting to see that happen. Brian Buckmeyer, thank you so much. Still ahead, the prosecution and the defense rest in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. So did the government make their case against the embattled hip-hop mogul? Our legal experts break it down when we return. Welcome back. After more than 6 weeks of testimony filled with tales of drugs, sex, and violence, prosecutors and the defense each have rested their case in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Time to examine the legal strategies as this case winds down. Brian Buckmeyer is here as the defense. Bernardo Villalona analyzing the prosecution. Bernardo, the name of this show is Burden of Proof. So I have to ask you, do you think the prosecution met the burden?
Absolutely. So let's just start off with the Rule 29, the motion that was presented by the defense in terms of that the prosecution hasn't proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. There's not enough evidence here for it to go to the jury. After about an hour of arguing, the judge asked the prosecution, do you have a response? Their response was probably less than 2 minutes. And what the judge said, well, I'm going to reserve it until the end of the case. Had the judge found that they did not meet their burden, he could have easily shut it down and said, you know what, this count is not going to the jury. I don't believe the prosecution has met their burden and there's not sufficient evidence for the jury to even consider that. But he said, no, he'll reserve it to the end. So right now, all 5 counts are going to this jury. In terms of have they proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, I think it's all going to come down to credibility in terms of the witnesses that have testified. But at the very least, in terms of racketeering conspiracy, where we don't really have to deal with the credibility of Cassie and Jane as to whether they consented to engage in these sexual acts, Racketeering conspiracy, you're dealing with Kid Cudi. We're having to deal with the arson. You're dealing with the kidnapping, having to deal with Capricorn Clark. You're dealing with the possession with intent to distribute. You have various witnesses that have testified to that, even the last witness being Brendan Paul. And in terms of the bribery, you're dealing with that witness, the security guard from the Intercontinental Hotel, where he was like, Sean Combs gave him $100,000 inside of a bag and actually had a money counting machine in order to get rid of that USB drive of that video. So at the very least, I think for racketeering conspiracy has been made out, but transportation to engage in prostitution, that's an easy one because you're using Sean Combs' text messages, voice notes, hotel records, the statements in terms of his financial records, and you have the witnesses as well who have testified as to engaging in sexual acts and being paid for it.
Bernard is very convincing, Brian.
I mean,
but
yeah.
you actually say that there's a lot of question marks around the.
So let's go point by point as what Bernard has stated. Right, Rule 29. She's right. Arguments were made, but the standard in Rule 29 isn't proof beyond a reasonable doubt. In fact, prosecutors love it because the standard is in the light most favorable to the prosecution, meaning giving them all reasonable inferences. Did they prove the case? And that's why the judge said he's going to reserve a ruling on it, because the ball is already in their court when it comes to a Rule 29. It's much easier at this stage than at the stage when it comes down to the jury making a decision. And judges do not want to rob jurors from the ability to take a case and make a decision. Our criminal justice system is based on being judged by a jury of your peers, not by a judge. And so the judge is going to probably forego making a decision on this case and allow the jury to decide and then move from there. In terms of the racketeering conspiracy, I think that, 6, 7, 8, maybe 11 people are going to agree with Bernarda. But the great thing about being a defense attorney, you just got to convince one. And I think there was a strong argument in that Rule 29 motion for an acquittal in the sense that Sean Combs did not conspire with others. There was no direct or indirect agreement with others. The fact that they all acted in unison, maybe they all had the same goal, the same idea, but there was never an idea that an actual agreement. Let me land this plane. I got you. So
There's a bit of turbulence.
Yeah, I know, it's okay. But the things that I thought really stood out was D-Rock, one of the people that's supposed to be in the inner circle in this whole conspiracy. When Cassie was being beaten up and assaulted by Sean Combs, she ran to D-Rock for protection. He did not force her back into the conspiracy because of this agreement that he had. He protected her. Christina Corum, through text messages, said, you can't keep lying to me. You have to tell me the truth. How do you lie to your co-conspirators and still have a conspiracy? How do your co-conspirators protect the person that you're trafficking from you and that's still a co-conspirator? I think that was an interesting argument. I think you can get one or two people.
But I think the way that Brian's approaching it is that you're acting like there needs to be a formal agreement. Let's sign this contract that you and I are going to engage into this criminal conspiracy. That doesn't happen. That rarely happens. That's why the prosecution is going to focus on, look, I want you to focus on actions because actions speak louder than words. So let's talk about the multiple incidents where Sean Combs' own people on the payroll were actually engaging in criminal activity. Let's not forget that actually Deontay, who testified out of his own mouth when he was asked, did you engage in any criminal activity on the behest of Sean Combs? And what was his answer? Yes. So you have a statement from one witness who actually worked for Sean Combs within that enterprise and says that he engaged in criminal activity. But when you have D-Rock rolling up to try to get Suge Knight in terms of the one time when they thought Suge Knight was at the diner and Sean Combs had 3 guns on his lap, you have that one. How about rolling up to Kid Cudi's house inside of that SUV? Corroboration, you have the officers that pull up and they run the plate and it goes back to Combs' enterprise. You also have in terms of, remember when the security guard was paid $100,000? Guess what they gave him to sign? An NDA. And what was the letterhead? Combs Enterprise. So you even have that documentary evidence right there. There's so much out there, but it's up to the prosecution to actually line it out for the jury to be able to evaluate the evidence and end up finding Sean Combs guilty of all these charges.
So the defense presented some messages today in an effort to move for an acquittal. They claim that the messages prove that Combs did not run a criminal enterprise. Do you think they were successful in presenting these messages?
I don't know if these messages really help them in terms of the RICO conspiracy. I think the messages, if anything, I think they're really focusing on the Cassie and the Jane of it all. And they're hoping that if they can pick apart those allegations, that if this criminal enterprise is meant to traffic people, that is the ultimate goal and purpose of it is. If the purpose is no longer there, then the criminal enterprise is either a failure or it didn't exist. But I don't think it directly attacks the criminal enterprise. If anything, it might indirectly do so.
Your response, did you think the messages were a hit to the case at all for the prosecution, or?
Eva, I mean, literally, we were pinching ourselves because it was hours and hours and hours of putting these text messages into evidence. So in terms of like people were falling asleep inside of the courtroom. So you lost what was the purpose of you submitting these text messages. But also at the end, in terms of what the defense did, the defense started putting in questions that have to deal with Sean Combs using his personal account to pay for the escorts, which if you look at it that way, then you have Sean Combs paying for the transportation to engage in prostitution. So I have no idea why the defense went down that line of questioning. Brian, do you?
No comment. Next question.
But I mean, why? Brian, what happened?
What?
What happened?
There was a question? No, Eva asked the questions.
Why would they put in all those?
Played straight to the hands of the prosecution. Come on, Brian, explain. Let's go.
Not everyone makes good decisions, and sometimes decisions are bad decisions. I don't think this one helped them. Maybe hindsight being 2020, maybe we don't know the answer yet. Maybe the closing arguments are all going to put this together, but I agree with you. This whole idea that Sean Combs is reimbursing the criminal enterprise who is paying for these individuals to transport people across state lines. I think Aaron Katursky put it very perfectly. It was a moment in court where we actually all woke up because for the first time we heard someone arguing with passion, and AUSA Comey said, so did he just pay to transfer people across state lines? Now, it was objected to, it was sustained.
That was the redirect, but that's exactly what Kenny Garagos did. I think it was a big failure on the defense by asking those questions because you played in right into the charges.
We'll see. Have to see how that plays with the jury as well. Brian, Bernardo, thank you both for being with us. Coming up, as the Diddy trial enters the home stretch, we are taking a look back at some of the top trending topics of this trial. We're going to go through some of them when we come back. Stay with us.
Are you feeling stuck with $10,000 or more in debt and all the interest that comes with it? Try National Debt Relief, as seen on the Wall Street Journal podcast.
Welcome back to ABC News Live. You're streaming Burden of Proof, the case against Diddy. 34 witnesses, 28 days of testimony, all leading to just 3 words that Assistant U.S. Attorney Emily Johnson said in court today: the government rests. Throughout the prosecution's portion of this trial, people trying to stay up on everything happening inside the courtroom, they turned to the internet. And that's where our segment Search came in, working to get you answers to your top questions about this case. Now that the government's case has come to a close and the defense rested without calling any witnesses of their own, we are bringing you a special edition of Searched as we take a look back at some of the top trending topics of this trial. Some of those searches: Cassie Ventura, 50 Cent, Kid Cudi's testimony, and Suge Knight. So joining me now in the studio is ABC News entertainment contributor Kelly Carter. Kelly, thank you so much for being here. So nice to have you in studio again.
Yeah.
Cassie Ventura, she was the #1 trend that people searched for. Does that surprise you?
I was going to say no shocker here whatsoever. I mean, we have to remind people that all of this gets jumped off because of that 2023 civil suit that she filed in December. Like, that's where all of this started. And she was the star witness for the government. And so everyone wanted to know every little detail possible about Cassie Ventura in this case.
So the next name that's trending is someone who was not on the witness stand, right, but his name has come up quite a bit online.
Yeah, you know,
50 Cent.
50 Cent has been very loud and vocal well in advance of even the indictment, if I'm being honest with you. Ever since Cassie's lawsuit, he's been very vocal. And I think he also has kind of become a little bit of a troll, right? Like, we saw him pop up at the NBA playoffs wearing a Free Diddy t-shirt. He did not mean it. He was not in support. He was poking fun at the entire situation. And I think people just wanted to know, what was that about?
Yeah, people were following his social media accounts just to see what he was going to post.
Just to see what he was going to post, right? And they still are.
You know, Lots of people still are.
Yeah.
Kid Cudi, it's been a while since he was on the stand. Walk us back through kind of what he said and why it was significant.
I think the thing that is staying with a lot of people, and most certainly is staying with me, is that description that he gave of pulling up to the Soho House in West Hollywood with Sean Combs. He said, looking out of a window, looking like a Marvel villain. This is not a Marvel villain, but for me, I pictured Morpheus from The Matrix. That was kind of what I saw immediately. I was thinking like collar popped up, kind of long cloak. And so he gave everyone that visual in his testimony. And of course, Sean Combs denied all of the allegations against him, and especially with what Kid Cudi was alleging happened. But everyone tuned in for that testimony because that was the first time we also heard Kid Cudi speak. We had heard, allegations of what happened with his car, but we had not heard him speak. That was the first time.
And he's so private.
Yeah, very much so.
We can't not talk about Suge Knight.
I mean, we can't, right?
I mean, he actually wasn't even at the courthouse. No. He is in a prison far, far away.
Yeah.
But yet his name came up repeatedly in the courtroom and online.
Repeatedly. It felt like I was back at the 1995 Source Awards, the thing that I think, everyone kind of knows to be true at this point is that both Sean Combs and Suge Knight were both heads of rival labels, and they both were men who helped to further commercialize hip hop music. And he was someone that kept coming up again and again and again in searches, even though he was nowhere on a witness list and actually is not even walking freely amongst us. He is, in fact, incarcerated and will be incarcerated for a while.
Kelly Carter, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back with new episodes until the jury gets the case. The show streams right here on ABC News Live, Disney Plus, and Hulu, weekdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. For even more on the Diddy trial, make sure to follow our podcast, Bad Rap, the case against Diddy, hosted by our very own Brian Pryor, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Now, I'm gonna say this right here, man. First and foremost, prosecution really, at this point, it narrows down to the point of the jury. So that's why they chopped a few of those guys doing charges down, basically, because they think they probably didn't have enough evidence to charge them with, with the trafficking and all that, and the kidnapping and all that, because it's gonna make them have to try to prove it to the jury. So that's probably why they chopped it down. But on the other hand, the next day or so, the jury's pretty much got doing ponder through all the evidence, or whatever evidence do they have, the little bit that the prosecution have, to see do they have a case or not. So, because if not, it could be a hung jury. He may get a acquittal. You know what I'm saying? It can go either way. From what I'm seeing, But I'm not no lawyer or judge. So at the end of the day, we would just have to wait and find out and see what happened on Sean Diddy P. Diddy. Do I think he might get some time? We'll just have to wait and see. Because he may walk. They may, that's the Fed. You're dealing with the federal, you're dealing with the Fed. So if he get any time, they might probably, work with him and offer him like 5, do 2 and then walk or something like that, because this is his first time ever being, incarcerated here long. So they're going to try to work with him. The Fed's going to try to work with him 9 times out of 10, because, the way he's reacting in court and stuff, he's chilling, doing what he's supposed to be doing. So therefore, we'll just have to wait and see what happens, man. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, Malone TV News, man, your boy see him to go 5, man. Oh, yeah. By the way, if you hadn't, make sure you go on Amazon, man, and order my book, man. You know what I'm saying? Hustle forward, not backwards. You know what I'm saying? Mama, I made it. Yours truly, Charles Malone. You know, Amazons.com. You know what I'm saying? BarnesandNoble.com. So go ahead and try to, get this book. If you want to find out anything about me in this book, it's all in my autobiography right here. You know what I'm saying? Got a little description on the back. Tell you a little bit about who I am, So, yeah, make sure you go get that book. Subscribe to the channel, Malone TV News, man. You know what I'm saying? On that note, man, we're going to go ahead and get up out of here. You know what I'm saying? So, let's go.